The room stopped breathing before I did. Not when the vows were spoken, not when the cake rolled out, but when a dull silver bell rang from the far door, and the master of ceremonies straightened his spine. "Attention on deck," he called. And then, clear enough to cut crystal, "Colonel Grayson, please step forward." Chairs scraped. Forks paused midair. My father's hand froze around a wine glass, the stem pinched white between his fingers. 2 beats earlier, he had leaned toward a half circle of men and said loud enough for the string quartet to stumble a note, "She's no real soldier, just a failure in uniform." They had skipped my name in the wedding guest list like lint brushed from a sleeve, but my boots still crossed the threshold. My uniform still fit, and the bell still rang. I didn't turn toward him. Not yet. Somewhere behind me, David stood the line of his shoulders, a calm I could set my breathing to. Somewhere inside me, a younger voice whispered, what it had always whispered, "Don't flinch." The door opened wide, light spilling across the mess hall tiles. A 2-star stepped in a weathered face presence that makes noise decide it's better off outside. He stopped 3 paces from me and nodded once. "Ma'am," he said, not out of politeness, out of habit. My father's mouth didn't move, but his grip did. The glass shifted, smudged. All those years he taught me to read body language across a room came back like muscle memory. I could see it, the flex of denial, the retreat of certainty. Colonel Grayson, the master of ceremonies, repeated, "Please step forward." That's the moment drama lovers want, the moment a bell rings and a belief breaks. But that isn't where this story begins. Not really. It begins with a different bell. The one inside your chest that tolls when someone you love announces in public what they have privately believed about you for years. It begins like this. "Don't mind her. She's just army trash." I didn't drop my gaze. I didn't search for the exits. I let the words pass through me the way bullets pass through smoke. Painful? Yes. Fatal? No. Because 1,000 small injuries had armored me long before this room decided to listen. The quartet hovered, unsure whether the song belonged to joy or to justice. A Marine major at the next table stood out of habit. Across the hall, a retired SEAL tapped a prosthetic foot, twice testing the floor. No one spoke. "He's my father," I said to David. "He's not your judge?" David answered. I took 1 step, then another. The sound of my heels was a patient metronome in a room that had lost its rhythm. I stopped before the general and felt the bell's echo settle. He offered his hand. His grip wasn't to claim or steer me, just the test of a rope you plan to trust. "Colonel," he said again, softer. "Ma'am?" If you're waiting for a speech that scorches earth, you'll be waiting a long time. The comeback had already been made, the rank on my chest, and the work stitched into the seams. How I got to that bell is a long road paved with short sentences. My father specialized in short sentences. "Stand straight, carry on, don't embarrass yourself." They taught me posture, not presence. Presence, I learned, is what remains when someone tries to reduce you to a punchline and finds you are not made of the material that folds. The day had started clean. Fort Myers Chapel wore the mourning like pressed linen. My escort, 4 soldiers, 2 Marines, and airmen lined the aisle as oath, not ornament. I wore service dress whites, no veil, hair braided tight. The invitation I'd mailed 3 weeks earlier returned with a single box checked 1 guest. No name, no note. I logged it, fact, not feeling. We kept the ceremony short. The vows were not poetry. They were orders we gave ourselves to serve in chaos and in calm, to honor what we build and protect who we become. At the reception, the room spoke the grammar of our lives. Boots aligned under chairs, jackets draped with care. Someone had set a folded flag and a photo of Samira, gone in Syria, on a front pew. I saw my father before he saw me. Dress blues, impeccable posture, unyielding. He stood with men from old stories. He didn't clap during the recessional. He didn't approach my table. When he finally spoke, he aimed past me. "She's no real soldier," he said, letting the words choose their volume. "Just a failure in uniform." They landed with a familiar thud. That's the thing about insults from family, they don't surprise you. They remind you. The surprise belongs to everyone else. The guests, the musicians, the man with the prosthetic who suddenly looked like he might stand because sitting felt wrong. And then the bell. Attention on deck. The general. The nod. My name said right. My father's face lost color the way a flag loses light at dusk, slow at first, then beyond debate. His glass tilted. A drop of wine slipped over the rim and left a dark comet on his shirt. No one laughed. Respect is not a joke, and in that room, it had finally chosen a side. If you want the whole story, you'll get it how a house trained me to survive silence, how a girl mapped West Point by lamplight, how a captain kept convoys alive in heat that made men see stars at noon. But for now, know this. I took the general's hand because I had already taken his meaning. You don't have to shout to be heard when the work is already spoken. I released his hand and found David. He didn't smile. He didn't wink. He just stood the way soldiers stand when they are proud and practical at the same time. Back straight, eyes steady, ready for whatever the next order might be. I breathed. The bell's echo faded. Somewhere a fork touched china. Somewhere else a heart unclenched. Part 1. The insult delivered, received answered without a raised voice. The rest would take longer. It always does. But the tempo had been set, and it was my tempo. My father never slammed doors. He closed them with the precision of a man accustomed to keeping maps from curling. That's how I grew up, not in chaos, but in order so tight it squeezed out every other sound. Colonel Thomas Grayson, 3 tours, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Iron Conviction daughters could not be soldiers. Sons. Yes. He believed sons were born with a license to fight to stumble, to be corrected back into line. But a daughter. That was a mistake to be tolerated, not trusted. At family gatherings, when relatives asked how many children he had, he'd say, 3. Then he'd glance at my brothers Ryan and Derek like trophies in polished cases. My name never entered the conversation unless someone else brought it up, and then his correction would come fast. She's the girl, not the soldier. Home was a museum of his service medals, framed commendations, folded flags layered with glass. Not a single family photograph in the living room, not one smile framed on the mantel. Our house was his barracks, and we were expected to march inside it. Shoes off before touching the rug, lights out at 2100, television forbidden during the week, dinner at 1800 sharp. Silence was not just discipline, it was the air we breathed. My mother softened it for a while. She was a literature teacher with a voice like a warm lamp. She read poems in the kitchen and pressed lavender into my dresser drawers. When I was small, she whispered that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands still. But cancer took her fast before I turned 14. After that, the house was a drill hall. The lavender faded. Her voice was gone. What remained was him, the colonel, who trained subordinates, not children. I learned how to survive without speaking. By 15, I could press a uniform sharper than any dry cleaner. By 16, I could recite the Army values backward in my sleep. By 17, I had memorized the entire West Point campus from maps I kept folded under my mattress. He didn't know that. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. He had a habit of ignoring things that didn't fit his blueprint. When my brothers blundered, he barked corrections. When I excelled, he said nothing. I remember one night Derek staggered home drunk in his dress uniform buttons, undone cap missing. Dad still shook his hand at breakfast. "Proud of you, son," he muttered. The same week, I won a statewide JROTC fitness competition. Top 5 across all categories, even against the male cadets. I walked in with a medal around my neck, proud enough to forget how the house usually worked. He looked at it once, then at me, then turned and mowed the lawn. That was the rhythm I achieved. He erased. You'd think silence would toughen you like steel, but it doesn't. Not at first. It hollows you out, makes you wonder if the echoes in your chest are shame or determination. Mine tilted toward determination, but only barely. My brothers called me stubborn, a wannabe. Dad just called me the girl. Never sweetheart, never daughter, just the girl. But even in silence, a seed of rebellion grows. Mine didn't take the shape of shouting or slamming doors. It took the shape of memorizing maps at midnight, of training in a cold garage with a sandbag I built myself, of dreaming of a place where effort mattered more than bloodline. It wasn't anger that fueled me. It was clarity. If he couldn't see me, I'd make sure the world did. Still, even clarity doesn't erase the sting of being invisible in your own home. The sting of watching him shake strangers' hands in uniform while never once asking me how I was doing. The sting of hearing him toast more sons in uniform at Christmas dinner while my name sat unsaid like a ghost at the table. That silence became my forge. Not my family, not even my mother's memory, though I clung to her whispers like scripture. No, the silence itself hardened me. Every time he erased me, I etched myself deeper. He thought daughters weren't soldiers. Fine. I would prove not only that daughters could be soldiers, but that some soldiers only exist because silence forced them to be stronger than noise. Roots of silence, that's where it began. Roots buried deep under medals that weren't mine, under photographs that were never hung under a father who saluted every flag except the one stitched into my heart. And yet, when the bus finally came, when the acceptance letter sat unopened by his coffee mug, I still wanted him to look at me once. Just once. But that's the thing about silence. It never gives you what you ask for, only what you earn. Rebellion in my house didn't sound like slammed doors. It sounded like sneakers on a frozen garage floor at 5 a.m. Rope slapping concrete, breath hitting air so hard it turned white before vanishing. While my brothers slept, I trained. While Dad polished metals in silence, I counted push-ups and practiced pull-ups on a bar. I'd bolted to the rafters myself. Every repetition whispered the same defiance: I will not vanish. At school, no one knew. I was quiet, almost too quiet, but I carried a secret every evening. After homework, I unfolded the contraband maps of West Point from under my mattress. I traced pathways with a finger, memorized quadrangles, chapel towers, parade grounds. While other girls traced hairstyles from magazines, I traced barracks. When I told Dad I was applying, he didn't shout. He didn't forbid it. He did something worse. He laughed, a short barked sound. Then he pushed back from the table, left his dinner half-eaten, and walked outside. Dismissal. That was his weapon. No argument, no recognition, just absence. The day the acceptance letter came, I left it on the counter by his coffee mug. I waited for the sound of him reading it, for even a flicker of acknowledgement, but the paper sat untouched until I left for school. When I came home, it was gone, replaced by the same mug, now empty, as if it had never existed. 3 months later, he drove me to the bus station. Not to West Point, just the Greyhound. He popped the trunk, set my bags on the pavement, and handed me a plain white envelope. Inside was a check for $500 and a note typed on his old military typewriter. "You'll need boots. Don't embarrass yourself." No signature, no goodbye. He didn't even wait for the bus to pull away. That was the day I stopped trying to win him. But stopping the chase didn't erase the wound. Sitting on that bus, watching cornfields smear into forests and then into cities, I felt two currents at war inside me: grief for what I would never have, and a grim determination to prove that absence could forge as well as destroy. When the bus rolled into New York, when I set foot on campus for the first time, I felt something shift. Not pride, not even relief. Belonging. The air smelled of starch and asphalt. Cadets in gray moved with the clipped confidence of people who measured worth by grit, not last names. For the first time, I was not the girl. I was a cadet. The training didn't care about my father's silence. It cared about how fast I could run a mile, how well I could lead under pressure, how many nights I could stay sharp with 3 hours of sleep and a fire team counting on my voice. At first, I was average. My voice shook when I yelled commands. My hands fumbled knots. But average wasn't enough for someone who had grown up invisible. So I worked. Every dawn, every dusk, every hour that others spent calling home, I spent on drills in study rooms on the obstacle course. There were no calls for me to make. Dad didn't answer. Ryan and Derek had their own failures to manage. I stopped dialing altogether. When graduation came, Others pinned their bars with parents beaming. I pinned mine myself. The seat reserved for parent of Cadet Grayson sat empty. No one asked questions. Maybe they knew. Maybe they didn't. That empty seat burned into me more than the sleepless nights, more than the bruised palms. It was proof of the choice I had made to wear a uniform not for him, not even for family, but for me. Choosing the uniform wasn't rebellion anymore. It was survival. It was identity. It was mine. And even as I zipped it up that morning, I could still hear his voice in the background of memory. You'll never be a real soldier. But I was. The uniform proved it. The silence proved it. Every step I took away from the bus station proved it. I chose the uniform, and in choosing it, I chose myself. At West Point, no one cared what your father thought of you. They cared about your ruck weight, your endurance, your ability to lead when sleep-deprived and ankle-deep in mud. That was liberating and brutal at the same time. I wasn't a prodigy. My first year, I stumbled through drill calls, lost my voice shouting commands, and nearly collapsed on a march when the straps of my pack chewed raw into my shoulders. But pain was familiar, and silence was something I'd been trained in since childhood. When others grumbled or cursed, I just clenched my jaw and kept moving. By the second year, I learned the art of quiet authority. Not loud speeches, not brute force, just precision. People listened when they realized you didn't waste words. I didn't tell cadets what I could do, I showed them. Step by step, rep by rep, hour by hour. That's how I earned respect. When graduation came, I should have felt triumph. I should have scanned the crowd for my father's face. Instead, I stared at the empty seat, marked Parent of Cadet Grayson. The absence was so sharp it almost felt like another uniform, tailored to fit only me. I pinned my own bars, saluted no one, and marched on. Commissioning sent me into logistics, a branch most dismissed as boring paperwork. But I learned quickly that logistics wasn't about crates and clipboards. It was about lives. Supplies meant survival. One wrong route meant soldiers stranded in a mountain pass or convoys ambushed on unscouted roads. My first deployment was a test by fire. Afghanistan, 2013. 118 degrees convoys stretching like fragile threads across sand that swallowed tracks within hours. Radios failing tempers, flaring civilians panicking. And me, a young lieutenant, trying to keep it all stitched together with maps improvisation and stubborn refusal to quit. One night, a supply route was botched by a lieutenant who had more charm than sense. The plan left an entire convoy exposed. I stayed up until dawn, reworking the plan from scratch. I flagged the missing supply chains, rearranged movements, and got the trucks out before heat stroke claimed more lives. My commanding officer called it Grayson's war plan. It wasn't flattery, it was survival. That's when I understood the uniform wasn't about ceremony. It was about responsibility. It meant you didn't sleep until others were safe. It meant carrying weight that no one saw and rarely applauded. Promotion came steadily. Lieutenant to captain, captain to major. Each stripe a quiet victory that no one at home acknowledged. The one time I mailed my father a photo, he returned it unopened. Another time, when an article I'd written on female command in combat support was published, he left me a voicemail. 10 seconds long. So you're doing interviews now. Be careful. No congratulations, no acknowledgement, just a warning as if success was a liability. The silence didn't break me. It honed me. Every unanswered letter, every unopened envelope taught me to lead without expecting applause. To measure my worth not by who clapped, but by who survived. By my fourth deployment, I was running operations across NATO lines, convoys, evacuations, training missions. My teams didn't question me. They followed because they trusted I would never send them where I wouldn't go myself. That trust was oxygen. It kept me alive in a world where my own family acted like I didn't exist. Each mission, each soldier returned home safely. Each system improved. That was my reply to my father's silence. Not words, not confrontation. Results. Earn everything. Expect nothing. I had whispered it to myself on my first day at West Point. By now, it was less a mantra and more a scar that had healed into skin. I wasn't just wearing the uniform anymore. I was becoming it. My father and I lived in the same country, but in parallel universes. In his world, he was still the colonel. He gave speeches at veteran events, stood stiff at parades, shook strangers' hands in uniform, and told stories that began with back in '91. The local papers quoted him about loyalty and sacrifice as though he'd invented the words. In mine, I was climbing quietly. Captain, then major, then lieutenant colonel. My promotions weren't headlined in newspapers. They were written in convoy manifests that came back with every soldier accounted for. They were buried in after-action reports that said mission successful, no losses. The strangest part, his world always seemed louder than mine, even though mine was the one still fighting wars. Ryan washed out of Ranger School in 3 weeks. Derek drank himself out of a commission after one disciplinary hearing. Dad shook their hands anyway, called them men of service. When I deployed to Africa for a NATO humanitarian corridor, he didn't even mention my name at Christmas dinner. I know because my aunt sent me a video. Everyone toasted. My seat at the table was empty, but not because I wasn't there. It was because my father had said it that way. That was his strategy erasure. He didn't rage. He didn't forbid. He just rewrote the script until my name no longer existed. To him, I was a civilian in camouflage. But parallel lines have a way of brushing close, even if they never meet. One evening, I caught his face on television. He was at a memorial service, standing straight-backed, giving an interview. When asked what he was most proud of, he said, "My sons. They carried the flag." I watched the screen in silence. My team was sitting nearby. They shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they should say something. I saved them the trouble. "He's not wrong," I said flatly. "They carried it. Just not very far." They laughed, then fell quiet again. I turned back to the paperwork. That's how you survive parallel lives. You build thicker walls. And yet every promotion I earned, some small corner of me wondered, would this be the one that finally made him look? When I pinned on Colonel, the weight of the insignia felt heavier than anything I'd carried before. Not because of responsibility, I had already been carrying lives for years, but because the word echoed. Colonel, his rank, his identity, his shadow. It should have been a moment of connection. Instead, it widened the divide. 2 colonels under one roof of memory and still no salute. But here's the thing about parallel lives, you can choose which one to walk. Mine took me to Syria, to South Korea, to Poland. I trained junior officers, negotiated with NATO, built evacuation corridors under pressure that could buckle steel. I led men who had no reason to follow me, except that I'd already bled beside them. His life took him to banquets, luncheons, polished speeches, always with the same line, daughters are daughters, sons are soldiers. The irony cut deeper every year. He had wanted 3 sons in uniform. Instead, he got 2 quitters and 1 daughter who carried the weight of them all. For a long time, I thought the silence would eventually break. That someday he would pick up the phone, clear his throat, and find words that weren't orders. But silence was his only language with me. And so I learned another truth: you can rise without recognition. You can lead without applause. You can wear the uniform and carry the flag even when your own family refuses to see it. Parallel lives, his filled with echoes of what he thought mattered, mine filled with proof of what actually did. The decision to have a military wedding wasn't about pageantry. It was about precision, about walking into marriage the same way I'd walked into every deployment uniform: sharp boots, aligned vows, delivered clean and steady. I told David I wanted it simple. Chapel at Fort Myer, white service dress for me, blue suit for him. No bridesmaids, no theatrics, just 2 soldiers making a pact. When the invitations went out, one stuck in my throat. My father's. I considered not sending it at all. After years of silence, after unopened letters, after every Christmas toast that erased me, why give him another stage? But hope is a habit that dies slow. I mailed it. Weeks later, the card came back. 1 box checked 1 guest. No name, no note. Just a mark on paper like I was another logistical problem to process. The day of the ceremony, I adjusted my collar in the mirror. Gold-trimmed medals earned braid tight. No veil. My escort. 4 soldiers, 2 Marines, 1 airman waited outside. They weren't in the program. They showed up because they refused to let me walk alone. "You never left us behind," one said. "Now it's our turn." When the chapel doors opened, the guests rose in unison. Not out of tradition, but respect. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was deliberate. David waited at the altar, shoulders squared, eyes steady, no grand gestures, no performative grin, just presence. That's what I loved most about him. He didn't try to make me softer. He made me feel seen. The vows were short, to serve beside each other in chaos and calm, to honor what we build, to protect who we become. We didn't need poetry. We needed promises. The reception was modest, an officer's mess hall dressed in white linen. Whiskey cornbread, a cake shaped like a Humvee someone had smuggled in as a joke. A trumpet played "America the Beautiful." For once, joy felt earned. And then he arrived. Colonel Thomas Grayson, my father. Dress blues, immaculate posture, unyielding. He stood near the bar surrounded by old comrades, men who had fought with him, who carried the same medals on their chests. He hadn't greeted me at the chapel. He hadn't clapped. He hadn't even looked at me when the vows were spoken. He just stood, glass in hand, surveying the room like he was inspecting a formation. I passed close enough to hear him. "She's no real soldier," he said, voice pitched to carry. "Just a failure in uniform." The string quartet faltered mid-note. Glasses froze in hands. A few guests chuckled, not out of cruelty, but because they didn't know what else to do. Heat crawled up the back of my neck. 12 years of silence condensed into 5 words. Before I could move, the bell rang. Sharp metallic. "Attention on deck," the master of ceremonies barked. The room shifted. Chairs scraped. Soldiers rose, even civilians straightened without knowing why. "Colonel Grayson," the voice carried, "please step forward." A 2-star entered presence, cutting through the air like a blade. He stopped 3 paces from me and nodded. "Ma'am." The guests turned. Whispers flared. "This woman," the general said, voice steady, "commanded a fleet in the Middle East. She led operations that saved not dozens, but hundreds of lives. When we think of leadership under fire, we think of her." Applause swelled. Chairs pushed back. People stood. I didn't move at first. I looked at my father. His face drained pale. His glass tilted. Red wine spilled down his immaculate blues. For once, the colonel who lived in absolutes had no command to give. The applause didn't stop. It spread like a rising tide. Not polite claps, not half-hearted acknowledgement. Full, unreserved respect. And I stood there, boots planted, heart steady, not because the general's words made me who I was, but because they revealed what had always been true. It wasn't his moment anymore. It was mine. My father didn't argue. He didn't shout. He didn't even try to cover the wine stains spreading down the front of his blues. He just blinked once, twice, like a man who'd stepped onto a battlefield and realized the terrain no longer belonged to him. Then he set down the glass, turned, and walked out. No apology, no goodbye, just footsteps fading against the mess hall tiles swallowed by the door's heavy swing. I didn't follow. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't need him to turn back. The applause still hung in the air, not as noise, but as weight that settled on me, not him. Soldiers I'd trained, comrades I'd bled beside, guests who had never met me before, but knew truth when they saw it. They stayed standing. A Marine major saluted. A Navy corpsman nodded. A retired SEAL with a prosthetic leg tapped it twice on the floor, a sound that meant more than words. It wasn't revenge in the way movies teach us, no fiery monologue, no triumphant slam of the fist. It was something quieter, deeper. Revenge wasn't about humiliating him. It was about standing so fully in myself that his denial finally collapsed under the weight of reality. Later in our quarters, David unlaced his shoes, quiet as always. I took off my gloves, laid them beside my folded jacket. The medals on my chest caught the moonlight. He called me a failure, I said at last. David didn't argue, didn't rush to console. He just asked, "Do you believe that?" I looked at the uniform resting on the chair. Rows of commendations insignia earned the hard way. I thought of convoys, rerouted under fire soldiers, brought home a live night spent drafting orders by flashlight so others could wake up breathing. "No," I whispered, "I don't." David nodded, once firm, like an officer signing off a plan. That was enough. Days passed, then weeks. The story of my wedding didn't make the papers. No one wrote about the applause or the wine stain, but people remembered. The ones who mattered carried it. And then months later, a package came in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, the chapel lawn, black and white grainy. In the corner behind a pillar stood my father. Back straight, head bowed, watching. No note, no signature, just the image. I kept it, not because I needed proof he'd come, but because it reminded me of what I had finally accepted. I didn't need his recognition to exist. I didn't need his salute to stand tall. But maybe, just maybe he had learned to see me, even if it was too late to say it. 3 months later, I was invited to speak at Fort Belvoir. The topic, Modern Command in Transition Women in Leadership Roles. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to be a token, a showcase, but then I thought of the cadets still checking their collars twice, the junior officers told to smile more, the women erased from roll calls. I said yes. I walked onto that stage in full dress uniform, not as armor, as earned reflection. I didn't use slides or quotes. I told the truth. About convoys, about mistakes, about leadership that means standing still when everyone else runs. I quoted, "Not generals, not family, but my team, their grit, their silence, their trust." When the talk ended, the ovation rose like a tide. Not thunderous, but steady. Respect that didn't need theatrics. And in the back near the doors stood my father. No uniform, no medals, just him. Older, smaller. He waited until the crowd filed out, then approached. "Ma'am," he said, extending his hand. "Not daughter, not the girl, ma'am." I shook it firm, steady. "You did good," he said, then paused, eyes uncertain. "I never knew how to show up for a daughter in uniform. That's on me. I've got catching up to do if you'll let me." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't absolution. It was recognition. For once, enough. That night back home, David handed me a letter, handwritten, familiar script. "I can't take back what I said, but your husband was right. You weren't just his commanding officer. You were always mine. I just refused to salute." I didn't cry. I smiled, not because I needed the words, but because he finally chose to use them. And that's the lesson I carry, the one I want you to carry too. Sometimes revenge isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about proving yourself right so completely, so steadily, that they can no longer look away. So if they skip your name on a list, in a room, in a family, let them. Stand anyway, work anyway, live anyway. One day, the world will stand when you enter, and the ones who erased you will realize too late what they lost. Respect isn't inherited. It isn't gifted. It's earned. And once you earn it, you never have to ask for it again. We salute you, and if no one else does, we will.